All right, let's take a look at genres or the type of movies that most people experience when they're in the movie theater. It's a way of identifying and creating a label for the film, but we want to go over the basics and how they change and what kind of narratives films started out with a certain type of genre classification. And you know that narrative is a story, it's a type of movie. It's structured around fictional. It may include factual elements from history to draw you in, but it's a story that never happened usually or is based on a real person, but usually doesn't reflect reality of that person in all ways. And it's a broader concept that includes going beyond any of these applications as far as how they tell the story. So if you think of the narrative concept, it's a way that the events are arranged to show you cause and effect. So think of it that way. Narrative is a result of a cause creating something that needs to happen that causes an effect. And this is a basic organization of a film that most of the films structure themselves around, and as they evolved, they became more complex. But they arrange events usually in a conventional order so it's easier to follow for the audience. And once they go beyond that, then they're mixing in elements to create a new sensation. And that's where we start to create multiple genres per film. So the narrative structure is based on Aristotle in the book Poetics. And it's what we've all used or become familiar with, where we begin with a topic, an exposition, we give you the details. As we move along, it creates a rising action of elements to keep your interest and create either tension or whatever the element is that they want. It eventually leads to a climax. After the climax, there's falling action. It starts to reduce the intensity of the film, gives you a moment to reflect, and then the ending of the film will also be part of that five-step structure Aristotle talked about many years ago. So types of movies. Now these are not genres. They're the type of movie, and then the genre will reflect according to the type. So we've talked about narrative. Another type of movie is documentary, usually based on nonfiction, factual elements that are used in a way in film to tell a story and create drama, but usually it's based on things that really happen. And then experimental is where they push the boundaries. You would not feel comfortable with most of those films until you created an identity with them and learned how to handle them. So those are the three types: narrative, documentary, experimental. Narrative films, as we said, tell a story. They're related to fiction, can be based on a screenplay written either from a book or from a stage production. Technical demands of the film production are more intense and are based more to entertain, and it's also meant to make money. So the four documentary approaches, now that we've gone through narrative and the type of movie it is: factual documentaries, instructive, persuasive, and propaganda. So according to reality, documentaries capture it as it happens. It's not usually staged, but they've been using that. They do that. It's a way of educating the viewer, and it's usually going to present factual, historical perspective that either looks at the political or social issues related to that story. So more factual is the photo here is from Nanook of the North way back in 1922, giving us an experience of how Eskimos lived back at that time, giving us a new perspective of that. They name other films that would relate to factual films that you may have experienced yourself, like March of the Penguins was very popular. All of these things relate to the marching of time and how those films also have changed to create interest in factual documentaries. A more controversial one is propaganda. So we wanted to go over that as far as the controversial images that have been created in the past. Here the example we use is a 1935 film by a woman, Leni Riefenstahl, who directed Triumph of the Will, based on the rise of Hitler and the strength he demanded, and the power of film really comes through. And of course, it was supposed to be persuasive to make people think of Hitler in a positive way. Remember, it's 1935, not World War II yet. And how the message is carried. So propaganda films are made by different countries, different political groups, and carry a statement or a message that is to influence you to favor the way they look at things. And as far as Leni Riefenstahl, she became an outcast after World War II, a talented person, really set new boundaries for women in film. Very unfortunate she tied herself to such an evil image as Hitler, and his actions went beyond forgiveness, and she no longer could work in film. She eventually did some other films, but the key point is it destroyed her career and probably set women back for quite a while because of what she did. And look at this overhead view from Triumph of the Will, and it shows the strength in numbers, uniformity, the ability to show dominance through a shot. Hitler, being a very small person, always dominates in all the shots, which shows her pure genius and how she used film to tell the story. So that's a certain type of factual propaganda documentary. The one that I always use because it's more contemporary, but it's also rather sad. The photo is of Tim Hetherington, who created the film in 2010, Restrepo. Actually filmed for about a year and a half, so it reaches back into 2008, 2009. Won the Sundance Award at that famous film festival. It also has a book associated with the film by Sebastian Junger, author of War, an excellent book to read if you want to see the reality of contemporary warfare from a U.S. perspective. Unfortunately, Hetherington always took on the more violent, war-driven documentaries, and he was killed in Libya in 2011, about a year after the film was recognized for its brilliance. In Libya, him and a companion were hit by artillery shell during that confrontation there and killed him. A very sad time for people in documentary film. So reality documentaries, even though Restrepo takes you into the real realm of war, reality documentaries are a little different. They avoid interviews, they have limited narration, they let you experience the moment by what you see and hear on film. So they use small portable cameras, they take the equipment on location, they capture it as it happens and then presents it in a film form. Even though they do edit the film, they try to keep it as it happens and maintain that reality factor. So that's a couple examples of documentary films. Experimental film is also known as avant-garde. So if you hear that term related to experimental, pushing the boundaries of what people accept as a way of being told a story. Some are extremely long. The longest I heard would take you days to watch because it's into the 60 hours long, something about that, as they capture reality. It pushes you to accept things of the innovative spirit and approach to movie making that you're not used to, such as a 16-hour film shows a person sleeping and the sleep process. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about as experimental. And if you're defining it, you can use Fred Kamper's 6 common criteria. It's not made to make money. It's very personal. It'll show something that relates to the person who made the film. It's not meant to conform to your expectations of a film story or a narrative film with cause and effect. It exploits cinema to push cinema to a new level. Some would disagree with that. Some would say sometimes it was used to lower the level of cinema. It's very much a critique of culture and how the media influences culture, and very open to individual interpretation. There's also subgenres of experimental where they do a formal experimental, self-reflective, satirical, and sexual. So the controversial ones would be self-reflective, which shows uncommon acts, or sexual, which would go too far for many people and actually cause uncomfortable feelings related to those topics. Now, one area is hybrid movies. Two or more types of films that are part of become a hybrid movie would be like mixing a documentary with experimental, or a narrative with experimental. So they use the example of Under the Skin, a 2013 film, which looks at an alien, so it'd be more like a fantasy, sent to Earth to harvest humans. And there you get the extremes on whether it's narrative or experimental. But a good example, if you get a chance to view a little of it, see if you'd even be interested in that type of movie. Genres then categorize narrative films. So the three types of films we talked about, narrative was the first one. It's a storytelling way. So it's a way to sort through the movie as a subject topic so people know what to expect. Then they can select movies they enjoy that genre or not. Reviewers critique one film of that genre against another one. Movie rental and retail sales use the genre to place films so people know where to go look for them. And of course, used in movie listings when they're released. So you got story formulas, themes, character types, setting, presentation, and stars as part of the genre system. And we're going to go through a few so you understand these. So a story formula, a theme, a character type, a setting, presentation, and stars are always elements they use to determine a genre of a movie. The six that really started with film and are still around, but now they add little elements to each so you get a better understanding. Gangster, film noir or dark movie, science fiction, horror, western, musical. You recognize some of these, I'm sure. Gangster, film noir, science fiction, horror, western, musical genres. So let's go through some ideas here. With horror, themes of death or insanity set the stage of the film so you know what type of horror film it is. We have a normal world or a rural setting, often at night, dark, when the horror starts to happen. We have a protagonist who's usually a loner or a flawed figure, an antagonist, one of those other people that feel like they're a threat to you. Sometimes they use infection, conversation, and very highly recognizable visual style, very dark, high contrast, and the images are very shocking. Western, more down to earth. Modern American mythology is based on this. Very big influence in the early years of film. Usually has a wilderness setting or a rural setting, not really based in what we'd consider civilization. And the characters usually have dual roles. You might see them as good versus evil, revenge factor, highly recognizable style because of the presence of the basic Western elements, guns, horses, different modes of transportation, such as Unforgiven, one of the most respected Western genre films in U.S. history. Musical, backstage narrative, very limited narrative, usually is based on characters that we identify with, their performers. They break out in song every once in a while, not exactly reality here. And the musical performances drive the dramatic moments, and most relate to romance, comedies, and sometimes involves animated features within them. As a film transitions, the process of how a genre changes or adapts to a changing society have occurred. So a Western will have a very traditional look or a very revisionist look, where it's more contemporary, where the good guys actually get hurt or sometimes are threatened, would be more revisionist compared to a traditional Western. So a hybrid will sometimes combine genres where you have a romantic Western or a gangster movie that hinges on a urban setting, things like that. So the subgenres come as a genre evolves. And you noticed I didn't really go through every one of these. Film noir is a very black film. It is based more on a female character dominating a male character and twisting them to do something they shouldn't do. And the ending is always tragic. So as you go through these, you'll see science fiction or fantasy now really dominates that fiction element, science fiction element. So we can go through these. They're in your book, but I thought I'd give you those basic elements of how they work. So for films, we're talking evolution and transformation of a genre. That's where a Western changes its form over time to try to gain new interest in the viewers, or a fantasy film is linked to a more science fiction approach. All these particular genres are adapted to meet expectations of a changing society to maintain that business aspect to draw people in. A hybrid can combine different genres in all the different elements. So you'll hear of romance going with gangster, etc. Subgenres occur when areas of narrative or stylistic specialization arise within a single genre that creates a sensation or change the perspective of that genre. And it also relates to digital animation. There, it started off with more of a drawing frame by frame to create what you might expect as a Disney film look, where Disney evolved the animation process, brought in color, created a new look that was done through elements and then slides. And then the slides were made into each frame to create the movie. Now with the digital process, you see a much more realistic look to animated films. They almost seem human. They continue to get better, but it is an expensive process because it's so labor intensive. But that's the trend nowadays, is to experience digital because it adds so much to the audience appreciation of it. So now the main thrust is digital makes the animation and creates a much more virtual world that you can experience. So whatever animated film you can think of over the years and how the images change would create a different aspect of animation. So read about that on your own. We won't go through each one. Just know that digital animation stands out above the others, even though most films still that relate to animation were done in the old form, hand-drawn, processed to make the flow, where now they can do it in a computer, get it done faster, put it out as a product that is of high quality. So we'll move on to the next chapter, but this one will take you into the genre and how to label a film, and hopefully you've gotten a little bit a better perspective of what a genre is and how they create types of movies.